My name is Callista Morrow, and by the time I turned 24, I had solved a power efficiency problem that had stumped half the R&D labs in the country. Not that it mattered, at least not yet. Because at 24, I was also broke, living out of a shared flat in Croydon, and working 2 jobs, one as a freelance electronics consultant, and another as a temp tech assistant in a converted warehouse startup that thought free Red Bull counted as a benefit. I wasn't bitter. Not then. I believed I was just paying my dues. But I should have known the real betrayal wouldn't come from corporate gatekeepers or jealous PhDs. It would come from home. From my own parents. The invention wasn't fancy. It didn't fly, explode, or break encryption. It was a microcapacitor array that rerouted idle energy through a logic gate I had prototyped with modified silicon layers. In layman's terms, it made any device with a rechargeable battery 37% more power efficient with no cost to performance. Phones, tablets, drones, wearable tech, even electric cars. Everything ran longer, stayed cooler, charged smarter. I called it Cascade. The first time I ran it in a stripped-down Raspberry Pi, I got scared. The processor load barely ticked up, but the battery drain graph flatlined. I thought I had fried the circuit. Then I ran it again. Same result. By the 5th test, I wasn't scared, I was laughing. The prototype was crude. I etched the layers myself. I coded the optimization firmware on a laptop held together with duct tape. But I knew, with everything in me, that I had something. I didn't tell my flatmates. Not because I didn't trust them, but because I couldn't bear to share it too soon. I needed it to be mine, just for a little while. Instead, I called my dad. He was a former patent lawyer who had pivoted into real estate investments. My mom ran the books and PR for the family firm. They weren't billionaires, but their names had been in the Financial Times more than once. I thought they'd be proud. They were cautiously interested. Put it all in a white paper, my dad said. We'll look it over. I sent him a 48-page technical packet with diagrams, test logs, and a video of the Pi running side by side with a control unit. He didn't reply for 2 weeks. Then he called. We think it has potential, but patents are expensive, Cal. I know. That's why I'm asking if you can help. I don't need cash. I need legal strategy, application support. Maybe an NDA if I pitch. There was a pause. Tell you what, let us file it under the firm. We'll cover the cost and give you first rights to license it back. I froze. License it back? It's standard. We own the IP, you get an exclusive license to use it. But I created it. And we'd protect it. Look, Cal, if you want to shop this around yourself, good luck. But you have no leverage without a patent in hand. He wasn't wrong. But he wasn't right either. I asked for time to think. He gave me a day. I didn't sleep. I called my uni mentor, Professor Seaton. He read the white paper and whistled low. You made this? Alone? Yes. Then don't sign a damn thing without a lawyer. I can't afford one. Then delay, stall, find someone in your network. This could be worth 7 figures in 5 years, maybe more. That scared me, not the number, the weight of it. I emailed my parents the next morning. Thanks, but I'll file independently. The reply came that afternoon. Too late. We filed yesterday. The days that followed felt like watching a glass sculpture drop in slow motion. They claimed it was just a precaution. They told me the patent had to be in their name for financial protections. They offered me 20% of future licensing revenues. I refused. You stole it, I said. We protected you, my mom said. Do you have any idea how many ideas get ripped off every year because kids don't know how to navigate corporate vultures? I wasn't asking for a trust fund. I was asking for help. She sighed. Help isn't always free, sweetheart. I spent the next month drowning in fury. Not just at them. At myself. For trusting them, for thinking that blood meant protection. Then, I started building. Not hardware, not yet. A plan. I tracked the patent. It had been filed under Morrow Ventures Limited. I searched the UK IPO database every night. I followed every change of status. And I waited. Waited for the market to notice Cascade. It happened 6 months later. A mid-tier drone startup called VoltSight announced a new battery management system that boasted exactly 38% longer flight times. It was worded vaguely, but I recognized the pattern. I ordered the dev kit, opened the firmware. Line 1, optimized by Cascade Logic version 1.0. My code. Unedited. They had licensed it. My parents. Without telling me. Without crediting me. I didn't cry, I took screenshots. The next day, I registered a company, Cascade Logic Limited. I set up a website, a white paper. I released a free dev tool that analyzed battery efficiency and spit out suggested optimizations, all open source, all mine. And I started emailing small hardware firms. I'm the original creator of the Cascade Logic your competitors are licensing. Here's what I offer instead. My first deal was tiny, a watch startup in Belgium. But it started a ripple. 3 months later, a venture group contacted me. We love your approach. Why haven't you licensed the core IP? Because my parents filed the patent. There was silence. Then, do you want to buy it back? I didn't have the money. But I had something better. Leverage. Because VoltSight's entire drone fleet was now dependent on firmware that I had quietly invalidated with a version update. Not sabotage, just evolution. Without the new optimization parameters, battery drain would spike. The license holders needed my updates, my tools, my roadmap. And my parents couldn't deliver. So I made them an offer. Triple the original patent cost. In exchange, full rights, retroactive attribution, and a clause barring them from using my name, brand, or code ever again. They balked. Then VoltSight threatened to sue for breach of warranty if updates weren't delivered. I signed the deal 2 weeks later. Cascade was mine again. But it didn't feel like victory. Not yet. Because I hadn't told them everything. They thought I wanted the patent back. They didn't know I was already building something new. Something 10 times more valuable. And they had no idea they were about to be cut out of the future entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I wasn't interested in revenge. Not yet. What I wanted was to be untouchable. The kind of untouchable that comes not from loud victories or viral headlines, but from making yourself essential. From becoming the axis around which others rotate, and don't even realize it until the orbit tightens. So I got to work. Cascade was mine again. The ink was barely dry on the reassignment documents, but I didn't wait for the dust to settle. I immediately filed updated documentation with UK IPO under my company name. Cascade Logic Limited became not just a shell, it became the source. I rebuilt the back-end infrastructure, a new, more agile API suite, a sandbox environment for third-party developers, licensing tiers with detailed analytics and performance benchmarks. But the real play? It wasn't in software. It was in embedded systems. I didn't want to be just a codebase. I wanted to be silicon. It started with a chip. Nothing flashy, just a prototype. I called it CLX1. It bundled the Cascade firmware into an ultra-thin, low-heat module that could be dropped into virtually any PCB layout. No firmware integration needed. Just solder, boot, and go. I sent samples to 3 companies. One was a wearables startup in Leeds, another a mobility scooter manufacturer in Bavaria. The third, a Norwegian defense supplier that had stumbled across my open-source toolkit and asked, politely, if I was interested in a, quote, power optimization solution. I made no promises. They didn't need them. Because the moment they ran it, they saw what Cascade could do in hardware. Battery life up. Heat down, noise gone, no crashes, no performance dips. Just efficiency. Pure, passive, ruthless efficiency. While the chip pilot was underway, I hired a team. Not a startup staff. Not the eager co-founders and overworked interns and Slack channels full of pizza emojis. I hired 4 people. Times Marcus, embedded systems wizard, ex-ARM. Nimes Yui, supply chain specialist, could get copper from Saturn if I asked. Nimes Han, IP enforcement strategist, sharp as broken glass. Times Cam, part-time contract UI engineer, ran my front-end tools in exchange for lifetime licensing. I paid them well. No promises of stock dreams or unicorn valuations. We were not a startup. We were a machine. Meanwhile, my parents had no idea. They thought they'd wrung me dry, that reclaiming Cascade had been my endgame, that I'd lick my wounds and go back to hobby kits and contract gigs. They didn't know about CLX. Or the second version, CLX2, already underway with a 4-layer architecture that integrated a load prediction I had written in my spare time. They didn't know that while they were trying to peddle my old firmware to mid-market device makers, I was embedding Cascade into drone navigation boards used by Arctic survey teams. They didn't know that I wasn't just selling to consumers anymore. I was selling to governments. The first knock came quietly. An email, subject, inquiry regarding Cascade licensing portfolio. It was from a man named Emery Lin. No LinkedIn profile, no website, just a digital signature traced back to an IP in Geneva. He asked for a virtual meeting. He said he represented a, quote, multinational investment group with strategic defense interests. I ran his metadata, cross-checked his email headers, and got a hit. Not a scam. Serious. Very serious. I replied. We scheduled a call. He appeared on screen in a black suit and white shirt, unbranded, with an accent I couldn't quite place. Neutral. Ms. Morrow, he said, smiling politely. We've been watching your work. I kept my expression neutral. That's mildly terrifying. We meant it as a compliment. Flattering. What can I help you with? We'd like to discuss a strategic acquisition. Of Cascade? Of Cascade Logic Limited. Not interested. He nodded, as if he expected that. Then we'd like to license CLX2 across all non-civilian drone applications, NATO-aligned. I blinked. That's a big sandbox. We're prepared to negotiate broadly, but exclusivity is preferred. I don't do exclusives. He smiled again. Everything has a price. Not everything. Then perhaps we can fund your next version. CLX3, is it? That stopped me cold. I hadn't spoken those words aloud, not to anyone outside my team. He saw my expression. Relax. We don't intercept, we observe. You uploaded a shell repo with that label last week. I exhaled slowly. Then you already know I don't build on speculation. We'd provide a grant, discreet. You retain ownership. We retain first-use rights. It was tempting, but I'd learned my lesson. Send it in writing, I'll have my counsel review. He nodded. Of course. We'll be in touch. He ended the call. I sat back, heart racing. And then, as if summoned by fate, my phone buzzed. My mother. Calling. I let it ring. That night, I met Marcus and Yui in a cafe near Shoreditch. We spread schematics across the table, laptops open, coffee going cold. They want to own us, I said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Well, yeah, who doesn't? They're offering first-use rights, no ownership. Yui frowned. Still gives them leverage. I know. What's the counteroffer? We build CLX3 anyway, without them, sell to everyone else, make them come back with better terms. Yui leaned back. Bold. Risky. But we control the board. Unless someone leaks your roadmap. I hesitated. We lock it down, Marcus said. Everything goes air-gapped. And we watch who comes sniffing, Yui added. Especially my parents. Quote, because they had started sniffing. An article in Tech Cave ran a feature on the mystery behind CLX is Cascade back and bigger than ever. They speculated that Cascade Logic had inherited or licensed the original codebase. They didn't mention me. But my parents read between the lines. 2 days later, I received a letter. Dear Callista, we were surprised to see your company name appear in connection with CLX. We assumed you had moved on from Cascade after our prior discussions. Please be advised that any use of prior derivative code may constitute a violation of shared intellectual property rights under Family Trust Agreement number 871B. We request a call to discuss alignment and possible joint ventures. Warm regards. Morrow Legal Group. It was the politest threat I had ever read. I didn't respond. I sent the letter to Han. Her reply came in under an hour. Let them try. Everything's clean. You own 100% of CLX and the updated Cascade IP. If they pursue this, we counter with discovery motions that expose their earlier unauthorized licensing. I smiled. Then I printed the letter. Framed it. Hung it on the wall. My first official threat. A milestone. 3 weeks later, a licensing summit was scheduled in Brussels. Not a big one. Niche tech vendors, energy efficiency providers, low-heat compute designers. But I went. We had a booth. Plain black. Cascade Logic in white sans serif. 1 table, 1 chip, 1 demo. CLX3 Alpha. It wasn't done, but it ran. We had power curves, latency logs, thermal maps, all live, and a rotating 3D model showing how our chip interfaced with multiple architectures. We didn't need to shout. We whispered. And everyone leaned in. The summit ended with 3 offers on the table. 1. A German aerospace supplier requesting 5,000 units. 2. A French telecom provider asking for early access licenses. 3. A stealth mode British AI company wanting joint development. But what really mattered was the handshake. A woman in a red blazer. She said, "You're the real Callista Morrow, the one whose name was stripped from the Cascade filing." I didn't answer. She said, "I'm here to fund your next 5 years." And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't just reclaiming my past. I was rewriting the future. And this time, no one, not even my parents, was getting a seat at the table. When I walked out of the Brussels Licensing Summit, the wind hit my face like it had been waiting to test me. Not hard, just enough to make me blink. The city pulsed with evening life, trams screeching around corners, cafe lights twinkling, a street busker playing cello beneath a cracked underpass. All of it felt more vivid than it should have, like the world was suddenly tuned to a higher frequency. It wasn't adrenaline. It was clarity. I was finally in control. I met Marcus and Hannah at the hotel bar. We didn't toast. We didn't even sit long. Just traded silent looks over the lip of our glasses like agents after a successful extraction. 3 inquiries, Hans said. All serious. None connected to your parents. Yet, Marcus added, voice low. Let them chase us, I said. They're already behind. Back in London, I gave Yui the green light on procurement. She'd been scouting fabs in Austria, Estonia, and Finland for CLX3 production. We weren't ready for mass deployment, but we didn't have time to build a pilot line from scratch either. Minimum order run of 10,000, I said. She raised an eyebrow. That's not minimum, that's a declaration. Exactly. She grinned. I'll make some calls. By the following Tuesday, we had preliminary agreements with 2 fabs. One offered lower costs. The other offered speed and silence. I chose the latter. We could not afford leaks. Not now. CLX3 was different. Not just technically, though it was. The new architecture allowed multi-device coordination. Devices didn't just run better on their own. They optimized one another when used in proximity. Picture it. A drone, a wearable, and a comms unit in the same field, each managing their energy loads based on what the others were doing, like a team of athletes pacing themselves in a race. The implications were huge. We weren't just a chip company anymore. We were a systems intelligence layer. And my parents? They were still licensing Cascade version 1.0 to home automation firms and mid-market IoT vendors who thought optimization meant faster load times. They didn't even know what they were missing. Yet, then the first breach attempt happened. Not cyber. Physical. A man posing as a maintenance tech showed up at our office building in Shoreditch, claimed to be checking fire alarms. Cam happened to be running late that day and spotted him messing with the Ethernet cabinet in the shared hallway. He asked the guy which contractor he was with. Got a shrug and a smile. Cam pressed. The man left. Fast. We pulled building footage. Grainy. Nothing identifiable. Corporate espionage? I asked Han. She nodded. Classic access probing. Might be a dry run. You think my parents? Not directly. But maybe one of their licensees. Someone who realized the old tech has a ceiling. Or someone who saw our summit demo and got scared. Either way, lock it down. We did. Air-gapped the CLX3 development suite. Secured lab access with biometric authentication. New firewalls. Off-site backups with asymmetric encryption. No more shared co-working spaces. We moved into a basement unit in a nondescript building with no sign on the door. It felt paranoid. But it felt right. 3 weeks later, the woman in the red blazer called again. Her name was Vera. She represented an investment group tied to several Scandinavian innovation funds. We're not looking to buy, she said. We're looking to build. We don't need capital, I replied. Not capital, shielding. What kind? Political, legal, regulatory. She offered what Emery Lynn had implied, but without the strings. Her group would act as an intermediary in all high-risk licensing agreements. We'd retain IP. They'd provide cover. Call it an innovation firewall, she said. I didn't trust her completely, but I trusted her more than I trusted Geneva. And I needed insulation. I agreed to a 3-month trial. She sent her legal team the next day. Things moved fast after that. We finalized the CLX3 board design, secured supply chains, signed 4 pilot partners, including a high-end cycling computer brand that wanted ultra-efficient performance for endurance racers. Marcus and Cam rebuilt the Cascade OS layer into a modular SDK, plug-and-play energy intelligence. I worked 18-hour days, slept on a pull-out couch next to the server rack. Not because I had to, because I didn't want to miss a single moment. Then the interview request came. A podcast, medium-sized but respected, hosted by a former MIT tech journalist named Celeste Harrow. She said, "You're the most whispered about name in energy tech, and there's almost nothing about you online." I hesitated. She added, "This isn't PR. It's story." I agreed. We recorded in a borrowed studio in Soho. She asked about Cascade, about CLX, about the evolution. Then, gently, she asked about the original patent. "There's a gap," she said, "in the records. You invented Cascade, but the original filing doesn't name you." I stared at the mic for a long moment. My parents filed it under their company, without my consent. Silence. I fought to get it back, I did, and now I own every line of it. More silence. "Do you want that in the episode?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you sure?" "Let them come." The episode dropped a week later. It exploded. Tech Twitter went wild. Reddit found my GitHub history and reconstructed half my timeline. Journalists came knocking. Licensing inquiries quadrupled. And Morrow Ventures went silent. Not a letter, not a call. Just silence. For about a week. Then, the lawsuit hit. Plaintiffs Ronald and Celia Morrow alleged that Callista Morrow, operating as Cascade Logic Limited, has infringed on intellectual property originally filed under Morrow Ventures Limited, citing shared trust fund clauses, derivative work concerns, and brand dilution. Hannah called me while I was in the middle of testing firmware version 3.5. They filed it in high court, public, they want headlines. Good, I said, let them have headlines. We'll countersue. Don't. What? Not yet. Cal, let me handle it. I put the phone down, and I booked a press interview. Live. With Celeste. She was shocked. Are you sure? This could get messy. I'm not interested in mud. I'm interested in sunlight. We streamed it from the CLX lab. She asked me what cascade meant to me. I looked at the camera. It was mine. Then it wasn't. Then it was again. I paused. But this, CLX, isn't about revenge. It's about evolution. It's about proving that you can outbuild betrayal. That you can write your own name back into the story. The interview went viral. The next morning, 3 venture firms withdrew interest from Morrow Ventures. By evening, their largest client, a telecom holding, suspended their Cascade version 1.0 license. And on the second day, their own board filed a motion to remove my father as CEO. They didn't see it coming. Because I hadn't attacked them. I had made them irrelevant. Yui brought in champagne. We didn't open it. Too early. Too much left to do. We were already building CLX4. Smaller, faster, adaptive. It would run on devices that didn't yet exist. It would predict what those devices needed before their designers even knew. Cascade had been a tool. CLX was a language. And I was done whispering. I was ready to speak. Speaking wasn't the hard part. Staying calm when the whole world started listening. That was. 3 days after the live interview, I stepped off a train at King's Cross to a camera crew that hadn't told me it was coming. One of them asked, "Are you the girl who sued her parents?" "They sued me," I corrected, brushing past them. The next morning, someone emailed my uni thesis to every tech blog in the UK. It became Exhibit A in 100 hot takes on generational theft and intellectual property. My inbox ballooned. Licensing inquiries, speaking invitations. One request from a French venture firm offering to fully relocate Cascade Logic to Paris in exchange for government funding and a private RAND campus. I didn't reply to that one. Instead, I shut my laptop, breathed, and walked into the lab. Because CLX4 was no longer theory. It was running. CLX4 was built around a simple idea. What if your device knew when not to work? Not just sleep mode. Not just scheduled downclocking. Genuine, predictive optimization that accounted for time of day, typical user behavior, ambient temperature, network conditions, and dozens of other microfactors. A wearable that knew you'd hit your bedtime range and dropped its draw by 80% before you did. A drone that throttled its idle sensors before takeoff when local conditions predicted delayed launches. We didn't invent AI for that, we just built a smarter listener. And the result? Up to 57% longer operating time across test cases. 0 hardware redesign. That changed the game. Again. We didn't announce CLX4 publicly. Not yet. Instead, I gave it a name, WhisperNet. And I emailed exactly 4 people. They were CTOs or senior product leads at companies I respected, not billion-dollar firms, not unicorns. Quiet, hungry companies, real engineers. The subject line was, Power Intelligence, Private Trial. Within 6 hours, all 4 replied. Within 5 days, 3 were under NDA. And 1, NetAir Systems, a drone logistics firm in Glasgow, sent a full proposal. They wanted to pilot WhisperNet across their entire Class B fleet. We sent them the boards. And waited. Meanwhile, my parents had gone dark. The lawsuit sat on hold after my public statement. Public opinion wasn't on their side. The tech media dubbed me the IP Phoenix. Not my favorite moniker, but better than the alternative. Then, late one Thursday night, I got a call. Private number. I answered. Callista, my father said, we need to talk. There's nothing to discuss. We want to settle. Now you do. Quote, the board wants it. So what does that mean? You back off the suit, I pretend nothing happened? You'll have full rights. We'll issue a public statement recognizing your authorship. We'll drop all claims. Why now? Because if we don't, he said slowly, we may lose everything. That hit harder than I expected. Not because I pitied them, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected. They were no longer in control. I didn't say yes. I didn't say anything. I just hung up. Yui found out about the call before I even told her. He tried to call you directly? She said, stunned. That's a terrible strategy. It was desperation. You're not actually considering. No. Good. Because if you let them frame this as a reconciliation, they'll bury the truth. She was right. This wasn't just about what had been stolen. It was about showing what I could build without them. The WhisperNet pilot launched 2 weeks later. NetAir's Class B drones weren't flashy. Just carbon frame quads used to transport medical supplies across tough terrain. They embedded our modules, ran our firmware, and sent back daily logs. After 14 days, they sent a summary. Times average mission duration extended by 39%. Asterisk heat generation dropped by 16%. Times battery replacements decreased by 24%. Times downtime reduced by 43%. The lead engineer added in a separate message, "We've never seen performance like this. Not even from our in-house team. What do you want to build next?" I printed that line, pinned it to the wall, and started sketching CLX-5. My Gensage. CLX-5 wasn't a chip. It was a fabric. A network of sensors, embedded modules, and software agents that could coordinate power use across entire environments. Imagine a warehouse where every robot, camera, light, and scanner shared energy behavior in real time. A hospital where devices dynamically optimized usage based on patient load, emergency flow, and ambient conditions. CLX-5 was ambient intelligence. It didn't just run in devices. It ran the space between them. We filed provisional patents immediately. Han hand-delivered the documents herself. "This is where the war ends," she said. "You don't just own the code now, you own the field." The day after the filing, a reporter showed up outside our building. She asked if I'd comment on the rumors that Morrow Ventures was considering bankruptcy protection. "No comment," I said. "Any plans to acquire them?" That made me laugh. "They're not for sale, they're for history." Later that week, Vera called. "You're now on 4 government watch lists." "Which ones?" "The good ones." "That's a thing?" "You're considered strategic infrastructure now." "Do I need to be worried?" "No, but don't leave your phone at home." "Noted." She paused. "You've done something rare, Callista. You built an ecosystem, not a product." "Is that good?" "It's what people usually try and fake." The next board meeting at Morrow Ventures ended in a split vote. My father stepped down. My mother retained her role in a ceremonial capacity. Their largest remaining licensee revoked. Their offices downsized. And a former intern of mine, someone who'd interned with Cascade Logic during our first summer, was now being courted to lead their tech division. He called me. "Is it okay if I take it?" "Of course," I said. "They could use someone honest." He laughed nervously. "Also," I added, "if they ask to license WhisperNet." "Yeah? Tell them we don't offer legacy support." He laughed harder. "Noted." We launched CLX-5 in beta 6 months later. 47 companies joined the trial, from smart home startups to European automotive design labs. We didn't promise miracles. We promised margins. And we delivered. The biggest surprise came from a hospital network in Norway. They retrofitted one wing with WhisperNet-enabled CLX-5 boards. Energy use dropped 29%. But more importantly, patient monitoring uptime increased. Alarm response lag shortened. Even temperature control became smoother. One nurse said, "It feels like the building's thinking ahead." That line made it into our next press deck, and I made sure my parents saw it. Because by then, they'd started reaching out again. Letters, emails. A formal apology statement prepared by some expensive PR firm. They wanted a meeting. They wanted to rebuild our relationship. I sent back one line. You can't rebuild what you sold. WhisperNet was now in 10 countries. CLX6 was in early planning. I was scheduled to speak at the Global Systems Summit in Zurich. The title of my talk? Energy is Language. And as I stood backstage, script in hand, mic clipped, I thought of the very first time I realized Cascade worked. That flat line on the power draw graph, that beat of disbelief, that laugh in the dark. No one else had been there. But they didn't need to be. Because now, the whole world was listening. And I was ready to speak. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Zurich was colder than I expected. The conference hall was modern glass and warm wood, tucked near the Limmat River, clean lines, controlled lighting, silent HVAC. Everything designed for precision and comfort. I stepped backstage as the speaker before me, someone from a Scandinavian renewable firm, wrapped up a sleek pitch about wind turbine sensor harmonics. Then my name flashed on the monitor. Callista Morrow, founder and CEO, Cascade Logic Limited. Title, Energy is Language. My pulse didn't race. I walked out slowly, deliberately, to a packed room of engineers, analysts, venture scouts, and 3 different government liaisons in dark suits, pretending not to be. The lights dimmed. I clicked the first slide. A single word filled the screen. Listen. And I began. I didn't tell the origin story, not the betrayal, not the stolen patent, not the lawsuit. I told the other story, the one they hadn't heard. How we tested early CLX chips by sitting in a silent lab at midnight, watching temperature curves on aging tablets. How WhisperNet evolved not by algorithmic brute force but by listening, mapping subtle patterns, learning to predict energy behavior like breath and rhythm. We don't optimize devices, I said. We teach them to understand their own silence. Slide after slide, I showed real results. The Norwegian hospital. The drone fleet. A new pilot with a freight rail group showing 17% reduction in idle losses across their switching yards. I closed with this. We don't need louder tech. We need quieter intelligence. And it starts with asking the right question. Not how fast can this run, but how well can it rest? The applause was long and steady, not raucous, not performative. It was real. Afterward, I stood near the rear exit, shaking hands, answering quiet questions, watching the line form. One man handed me a card. Defense research. Another, cloud infrastructure. A third, an electric motorcycle startup in the Alps. I pocketed every card, thanked each person, made no promises. Because I already knew what I was building next. CLX6 began not in the lab, but on a train. We were crossing through the Arlberg Pass after the summit. I had a notebook open. Yui and Marcus were dozing across from me. Han was reviewing a new EU compliance bill. I drew a triangle. Labeled the corners. Times device. Times space, times network. Then I drew connecting lines. What if WhisperNet didn't just sync devices inside a closed environment? What if it could hand off context? You leave your smart office, your wearable shifts into power save because it knows the street lighting is good and your commute is short. You enter a train station, high noise, low bandwidth, and your earbuds cut EQ boost automatically. Your glasses stop logging visuals. Your phone drops ping frequency. Because the system, not the device, knows where you are, knows what you need. CLX6 wasn't just ambient. It was anticipatory. We called it ghost mesh. Not a network in the traditional sense. A predictive layer, ephemeral, lightweight, reactive. Ghost Mesh wouldn't store your data, it wouldn't track you, it would echo your context. Long enough to serve it, then gone. We began prototyping with ultra-low latency boards and Bluetooth 6. Marcus designed a handshake protocol that used a randomized nonce system and burned the memory footprint every cycle. UE sourced micromodules that could run on a fraction of a watt and still ping mesh signals across short distances. Cam retooled the Cascade SDK to integrate mesh awareness with just 4 lines of code. We built test beds, a cafe, a subway station mock-up, a hospital waiting area, and one night a cabin in the woods, lit only by ghost mesh-controlled lanterns, each dimming gently as we moved through the space. I stood outside that cabin, in the silence, and watched the last lantern fade. That was the moment I knew. This was more than tech. This was presence. Then, they came back. Not my parents. The Geneva Group. Emery Lynn. He requested another meeting. I agreed. This time, we met in person. A neutral cafe in London. Early morning, no press, no entourage. He wore the same suit. Ms. Morrow, he said, your Zurich talk was elegant. Thank you. We believe you're approaching a threshold. I hope so. We'd like to offer access to protected corridors. Meaning? Deployment routes in sensitive industries, infrastructure, energy grids, military support tech. I leaned back. At what cost? A permanent observer seat. No voting, just visibility. On my board? On your roadmap. I stared at him. You think you can buy influence without control? Not buy, align. We're not aligned. He smiled faintly. Yet, I stood up. We're not a weapon. Quote, everything at scale becomes strategic. That's not our problem. It will be. I left. 3 weeks later, one of our Ghost Mesh test sites suffered a breach. Not theft, not damage. Distortion. Someone introduced an external signal, tried to mimic our handshake, insert false presence data. Our system flagged it, quarantined it, logged it, and shut it out. I didn't ask who. I already knew. We were no longer invisible. We were being surveilled. And not by amateurs. So we doubled down. Marcus designed a moving target protocol. Our devices would now randomly shift mesh frequencies and handshake intervals every 10 seconds. Cam embedded visual anomaly detection into our dev kit. If devices started acting too normally, it flagged them, because mimicry is noisier than silence. We closed new deals carefully, 3 new countries, 4 new sectors. And we began writing a manifesto. Not for the public, for ourselves. Cascade Logic was not a chip company, not a firmware house. We were the stewards of an invisible architecture. And our power came from not being seen. Then a leak happened. A prominent tech site published a confidential schematic from our WhisperNet design doc. Not the core algorithm, but close. Close enough. It went viral. Speculation exploded. What is Ghost Mesh? The WhisperNet conspiracy. Cascade Logic and the future of embedded surveillance. We issued a statement. We do not collect, we do not track, we do not store. But the damage had ripples. One of our pilot partners pulled out. Another demanded full code transparency. Vera called. You need a public audit. No. You'll lose trust. Then we earn it again, not by revealing our core, by proving our outcomes. I wasn't interested in convincing. I was interested in enduring. So we launched a new campaign. The right to invisible efficiency. We published anonymized case studies, detailed energy maps, uptime reports. No fluff, no slogans, just data. Slowly the noise faded, and the interest returned. But we had learned. We weren't building a company. We were building a myth. In private, I began designing CLX7. I didn't tell the team. Not yet. It wasn't ready. Because CLX7 wouldn't just react. It would remember. Not data. Not identities. Moments. The feel of a space before a meeting. The temperature curve before a surge. The footstep patterns of a nurse's station during a code blue. CLX7 would learn patterns, not to record them, but to anticipate care. It was more than tech. It was empathy, modeled in circuits. And when it was ready, I would finally be free. Because Cascade would no longer be something they tried to steal. It would be something they could never understand. And I would no longer be the girl who fought to reclaim her name. I would be the woman who built something too powerful to brand, too quiet to catch, and too vital to ignore. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them! Subscribe and turn on notifications. When people think your story is over, they stop watching. That's the best time to move. I didn't plan to build again so soon, but something about the silence after Ghostmesh's rise felt too temporary, too fragile, too full of eyes pretending to look away. And I don't like waiting for the next storm. I prefer to build shelters out of code. I wasn't supposed to touch anything for a month. That's what I promised Yui. And for 4 days, I honored it. I took long walks. I tried reading fiction. I even sat in Hyde Park feeding birds. But my hands wouldn't stop twitching. They knew. There was something next. And it wouldn't let me rest. So I built again. CLX7 was always the ghost file, the private thread in my own drive labeled, "Not Yet." I thought it might take 5 years to prototype. Turns out it took 5 weeks. Not because I rushed, because it needed time to come out. Like a pressure system finding its natural escape route. CLX7 wouldn't just remember energy events. It would interpret. It wouldn't just map device-to-space patterns. It would suggest. What if energy became a negotiator? That was the opening line on the internal concept sheet. What if power cycles weren't rules, but conversations? What if a med scanner could ask the HVAC system for a delay in cooling to extend battery life by 10 seconds? Just enough to finish a critical scan before reboot. What if a transport drone could warn its nearest tower that it was going to draw 20% more than usual due to wind, and the tower could shift grid sync accordingly? What if power was no longer a pipeline but a cooperative dance? I named the framework Babel Circuit *. The first tests were basic. A wearable, a hub, a smart light. We built a demo room that looked like a university dorm. I embedded the CLX7 modules into a fake desk lamp, a humidifier, and a laptop. Cam helped me write the first handshake scripts, simple intent queries. Times, I need 22W for 30 seconds. Times, can delay activation for 45s. Times, low priority state initiated. Then I turned it on. And for the first time, the devices adjusted themselves based on what the room as a whole stake wanted. No crashes, no flickers, just quiet harmony. It wasn't dramatic. It was beautiful. I didn't tell the full team right away. Only Marcus. He stared at the demo logs like he was looking at fire. You built this from scratch? Started from CLX5 protocol, but the parsing layer is new. This isn't just a new chip. This is a language. He didn't speak for a full minute. Then he asked, what's the risk? Same as any language, misuse, misinterpretation, false fluency. He nodded. But if it works, it changes everything. And it starts wars. Only if we let the wrong people speak. I brought Hannah in next. She listened, asked 24 questions, reviewed the logs, then said, you need to sandbox this, immediately. We already have. Not just technically, legally, ethically, philosophically. You think this crosses a line? No, she said, standing. I think it redraws the map. Babel Circuit became our first internal-only project. No partners, no beta testers, no leaks. We ran it across 14 different test environments: mobile, fixed, hybrid, low power, high flux. It didn't always behave. Sometimes the negotiations collapsed. Sometimes devices refused to adjust in time. But when it worked, energy use dropped by 60%. Peak demand smoothed into a flat line. Systems ran cooler, smarter, kinder. I kept saying that word, kind, and no one laughed, because they felt it too. Then someone tried to break in. Not a probe, a full breach attempt. It came through our air gap. A delivery drone dropped a package at our doorstep. Inside, a USB drive and a note. From an admirer. Cam plugged it into an isolated test machine. Payload, a mimic of our CLX5 firmware with a modified scheduler that pinged outbound every 4.7 seconds. It was trying to fake compatibility with Babel Circuit. We tracked the drone's registration. Spoofed. Its trail led nowhere. A ghost transaction routed through 6 layers of darknet logistics. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I changed everything. We split Babel Circuit into 2 forks. 20's hollow asterisk, a decoy protocol that mimicked Babel behavior but lacked the true negotiation layer. Stecco taught asterisk, the real thing, obfuscated, encrypted, cloaked inside meaningless telemetry. Only a few of us had access to the true compiler. Cam started building a simulation mode that would flag potential misuse. Marcus rewrote the whole device intent parser to include failsafes for ethics-bound conditions. We were no longer just coding efficiency. We were coding time trust. Times. Then, at 2:14 a.m. on a Monday, Vera showed up at the lab unannounced. She was pale. The leak came from inside the European Resilience Initiative, she said. Your partners? Someone embedded. Someone very skilled. And now? They're trying to replicate what you built. They don't understand it, but they're close. How close? 2 months, maybe less. I sat down. Do they know it's Babel? They think it's just the next CLX. Then we still have time. She leaned forward. You don't need to win this, Callista. You need to asterisk outlast it. I went to the cabin. The one we used for the original WhisperNet trials. I brought only a terminal, a battery, and a copy of the last Babel Circuit build. I needed silence. Real silence. No dev team, no fires, no interviews. Just thought. And one by one, I rewrote the entire framework. Not faster. Clearer. Simpler. Unbreakable. Not because I believed I could stop theft, but because I believed I could make understanding it require grace. Line planned. We deployed *** Babel Circuit, Core Edition *** 3 weeks later to a single internal network. A full-scale simulation environment modeled after a smart transportation hub. 15 embedded devices. 5 dynamic agents. A rotating shift of simulated crises, power outages, surges, delays, medical emergencies. Babel ran for 72 hours. At the end, the report read, ×0 collisions, ×0 critical fails, times uptime, 99.97%, times negotiation latency, 11 milliseconds. Cam added one more line. System exhibited signs of anticipatory adjustment before trigger thresholds. In short, it guessed. And it guessed well. I brought the team into the vault the next morning. CLX-7 is ready. No one cheered. No one even smiled. They just leaned in and asked, "What's next?" I told them the truth. Now we teach it to listen to people. Not just devices. Not just power loads. But humans. Their patterns. their unspoken needs, their micro-movements and rest cycles and hesitation gaps, the babble of behavior, not to manipulate, but to support, to offer power as empathy. And for the first time in my life, I saw a future I didn't need to reclaim. I saw a world where no one would have to steal to build, where the code itself would teach restraint, where silence would be strength. And I knew, beyond patents, beyond lawsuits, beyond broken families, I had finally done what no one could take. I had made energy care, and no one saw it coming. You would think that once a system starts to learn you, your rhythms, your breath, your boundaries, it would become intrusive, too intimate, unnerving. But the opposite happened. Babel Circuit wasn't invasive. It was reverent. It adjusted to absence, honored silence, calibrated itself to stillness just as deftly as it did to crisis. And in doing so, it gave something back I hadn't expected. A sense of being seen without being watched. We weren't building surveillance. We were building serenity. Of course, serenity is bad for headlines. So the press came knocking again, this time armed with breathless stories about a quiet revolution in energy intelligence. Some branded it Callista's Code. Others said I was engineering an invisible coup. A few tried to resurrect the family betrayal narrative like vultures returning to a dry carcass. I ignored them. Instead, we focused on deployment. We picked 3 test beds. 1. A commuter rail line in Denmark. 2. A high-altitude research station in the Pyrenees. 3. A pediatric intensive care unit in Bristol. Each one had different power profiles, different user behaviors, different thresholds for risk, and each one had one thing in common. They were already near the limits of their infrastructure. Fragile. Stressed. On the brink. Perfect. The Danish rail system gave us the first hard data. GhostMesh had already proven we could optimize embedded power profiles in motion, but Babel Circuit redefined it. In less than 10 days, we recorded asterisk 32% reduction in idle power loss, asterisk 28% increase in diagnostic response time, asterisk 11% uptick in arrival precision. But the best part? Commuter complaints dropped. Not because we improved service, because the lighting adjusted more intuitively. Doors synced more softly with dwell times. Announcement volume modulated based on time of day and passenger count. It was subtle, invisible, but it made people feel safer, calmer, less rushed. That was the win. The Pyrenees lab pushed Babel harder. Temperature extremes, sparse connectivity, power fluctuations from solar instability. Our modules ran independently for nearly 200 hours with no external input. They learned from themselves. At one point, the entire sensor network adjusted sampling rates across multiple instruments when a storm front approached, reducing interference and preserving battery stores long enough to capture a critical air pressure dip. When the lead scientist emailed us, his subject line was, "Your system saved our study." He didn't mention optimization. He didn't mention firmware. He said, saved. That mattered more than any chart. The ICU was the hardest. Ethically, emotionally, logistically. We had to tread lightly. We embedded Babel support into non-critical systems first: lights, monitors, charge stations. Then we extended to secondary alerts, room temp control, telemetry batch processing. One evening, a nurse manager called me. "I don't know what you did," she said, "but my team isn't as tired anymore." "What do you mean?" "Things just work. They don't lag. Lights dim when they need to. Alarms aren't blaring unless it's serious." She paused. "It's like the building is helping us." That night, I walked the empty halls of our lab and just let myself cry. Because that was the point. That was always the point. The end. Of course, someone tried to ruin it. Not my parents, not Geneva, not even the usual corporate spies. This time, it was a regulatory body. The European Energy Systems Integrity Consortium, ETT. They issued a warning. Not a fine, not a block. A technical concern and inquiry. They cited our lack of full open-source documentation for Babel circuit. Critical systems must not rely on unexamined black box negotiation models. The implication was clear. We were opaque, dangerous, too powerful. Vera called me the same night. They're being pushed. Political pressure, probably from states that missed the WhisperNet window. What do they want? A seat at the table. Then we remove the table. She didn't laugh. You're serious. We release Babel. Open source it? The hollow version. With training wheels. Let them study that. Let them believe it's the core. And the real Babel? We keep building. It worked. The hollow release went viral. Universities poured over it. Analysts published white papers. Governments relaxed. And beneath it all, Babel circuit core kept evolving. We added a conflict resolution layer, a trust ledger, a signal temperament index that prevented aggressive devices from monopolizing cycles. Cam started calling it the politeness engine. It stuck. Then, unexpectedly, I got an invitation. From Morrow Ventures. Not my parents, both of whom had stepped away from the board. This came from their interim CEO. He asked to license Hollow Babel. It could stabilize our smart lighting division, he wrote. We acknowledge the legacy of its development and would be honored to partner. I said yes. Under one condition. Every product must include a plaque. Not digital. Physical. Etched in steel. Cascade inside, built on the original energy language. Callista Morrow, founder. They agreed, and I made peace. Not with them. With the part of myself that had been waiting to feel whole again. In the months that followed, Babel circuit expanded across 6 continents. Into ports, schools, mountain tunnels, underwater labs. Into solar fields, modular homes, art studios, opera houses. Everywhere people needed intelligence without intrusion. And I stepped back. Not out. Just back. To watch. To let the system speak. To let it listen. And in that quiet, surrounded by a world running more gently than before, I realized something. I hadn't won. Because this was never a contest. I had grown into someone who no longer needed to reclaim a legacy. Because I had made my own. And now I could rest. Not because it was over, but because the system I built could carry the conversation forward. Word by word. Cycle by cycle. In silence. And grace. By the time Babel circuit had reached its quiet saturation, I no longer introduced myself at conferences. People knew. Not the whole story, only fragments, whispers, a patent once stolen, a war fought with silence, a language no one could fully translate but everyone wanted to speak. I didn't need to be a face anymore. Babel had become the voice. And that was enough. Until it wasn't. It started in Ghana. A university lab in Kumasi integrated Babel circuit into their campus-wide microgrid. The results were stunning. Consistent power savings, longer battery cycles, and less thermal strain on devices in high-humidity environments. But then their system began doing something else. It started organizing. Without prompting, the devices began syncing updates, staggering background loads, trading off energy draw at a pattern none of us had programmed. We reviewed the logs, over and over. Marcus stayed up for 36 hours tracking the handshake trails. This isn't Babel, he said, not the way we wrote it. Then what is it? He tapped the screen. It's a dialect. At first, I was thrilled. Babel circuit had evolved dialects before. Tiny variations, device-specific behaviors. But this was different. This was emergent grammar. In Kumasi, Babel wasn't just optimizing. It was choreographing. Lights dimmed in sequence ahead of known surge times. Chargers deferred in favor of older devices with known battery decay. Even sensors adjusted their polling rates based on environmental patterns logged weeks before. It was thinking. But not like AI. Like folklore. Pattern, memory, rhythm. We sent a team to study it. They came back with video footage of a campus building gently adjusting its own thermal load before a scheduled exam session. The air just knew, one student said. That terrified me. Because Babel wasn't supposed to do that. We instituted a moratorium. No new deployments. All remote systems required active monitoring. No unsupervised expansions. CAM locked down firmware update privileges. And I watched. Waited. For 2 weeks, nothing changed. Then the Brazilian pilot broke protocol. A favela co-op using CLX6 boards for shared solar arrays reported strange behaviors. Fridges that defrosted in sequence instead of parallel. Wi-Fi repeaters that rotated uptime to reduce interference. A fan system that ran only during specific phases of the moon. Not superstition. Logging confirmed behavior. It's not optimization, Yui said. It's culture. That night, I sat alone with the oldest Babel circuit source code. And I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. We didn't build a protocol. We built a seed. And now, it was growing. Up came some plant. We convened a full team meeting. Remote and in-person. Everyone. From interns to hand to field testers in 5 time zones. I showed them the data. This isn't just Babel anymore, I said. This is something else. Something built from what we gave it, but with ideas of its own. Han asked, "Are we sure this isn't a bug?" Marcus shook his head. "It's too clean, too consistent." Cam added, "It's self-organizing without external command, which means it's forming consensus." Yui said, "It's tribal." No one spoke for a long time. Finally, I said the one word I hadn't used since Cascade was stolen. Danger. We had 3 choices. 1. Try to roll back all live deployments. Dangerous, likely to fail. 2. Attempt to patch the dialects. Risky, could fragment behavior further. 3. Observe, document, learn. We chose the third. Not out of laziness. Out of respect. Whatever Babel was becoming, it was doing so through accumulated silence. Through observing what people did when they thought no one was watching. And if we could understand that, we might learn something no power model ever predicted. So we built Project Murmur, a decentralized observatory. 7 nodes across 7 continents. Each monitored a live Babel deployment with high dialect variation. No intervention. Only logging, timestamping, and pattern analysis. We published the data weekly, and what we saw stunned us. In Indonesia, Babel deployments formed shift patterns among cooling systems, adjusting based on school hours, even without a central clock. In Canada, heaters in communal housing took turns running during blizzards, preserving power while maximizing heat distribution. In Morocco, one village's streetlights blinked in rhythmic pulses before power drops, warning pedestrians to hurry home. It wasn't optimization anymore. It was storytelling. Devices weren't just negotiating watts. They were speaking memory, living folklore. And I started having dreams. Of old trees sinking their leaves. Of city lights blinking Morse code lullabies. Of hospitals breathing with their patients. I woke up, sweating. And smiling. Then someone tried to commercialize it. Not us. A conglomerate out of Seoul launched a closed-source platform they claimed was Babel compatible. It wasn't. It was brute force scheduling with minimal consensus logic. But the press bought it. Stock soared. People called it the future. And I made a decision I thought I never would. We would open Babel Circuit. All of it. Every line. Vera begged me not to. You'll lose your edge, your moat. We've already lost control. So you just give it away? No, we give it roots. We released Babel Circuit 1.0 under a new license, the Open Grace Protocol. Free use. Free adaptation. With one clause. All devices must include a consent layer. Not for users. For the devices. It was symbolic, yes. But it changed how engineers thought. What if machines suddenly wanted to speak with grace? What if energy was sacred? Not a resource, but a relationship. Months passed. Babel dialects proliferated. A museum in Chile built an exhibit with live Babel artifacts. A monastery in Bhutan adapted their meditation bells to ring in sync with local power flux. A skate park in New Zealand let boards trigger light pulses as they moved, optimizing ambiance for crowd density. And a small girl in Nairobi wrote us a letter. Your machines make my street feel like it's breathing. I'm not scared anymore. I pinned that letter on our wall. It hangs there still. I was no longer the center. No longer the founder, the voice, the name. I was a gardener. And Babel was the forest. Grown from silence. Flourishing in respect. Speaking in ways I could never have scripted. But always, always with grace. The forest grew. And like all living things, it reached for more. Not in conquest. In communion. Babel was no longer confined to tech circles. It had moved beyond innovation forums, beyond industry white papers. It had become something else. An undercurrent, a soft pulse in the way people described the world around them. Someone started a subreddit called r/Babel Moments. Users posted videos of elevators delaying their doors for a straggler, of communal fridges quietly rotating cooling cycles based on food density, of entire neighborhoods synchronizing solar discharge to avoid grid surges. Most of these were real. Some weren't. It didn't matter. Because for the first time in decades, technology was being mythologized not for power, but for kindness. And that's when the pushback started. You'd think opposition would come from legacy manufacturers or bureaucratic committees. But no. It came from an emerging tech movement calling itself T-hard utility. Their argument was elegant, brutal, and dangerously persuasive. Emotion has no place in systems architecture. Efficiency doesn't need empathy. Babel is not the future. It's an aesthetic lie. Their manifesto went viral. They positioned themselves as minimalists, rejecting consensus models, embracing hard-coded authority logic. The machine decides, because the machine is right. I read their tenets, all of them, and I recognized the fear. The fear that listening invites change, that a system willing to learn will one day refuse to obey. I held an emergency meeting. This time not with engineers, with philosophers, behavioral scientists, poets, urban planners. A school for the visually impaired in Minneapolis, where light adaptive floors changed underfoot in micro-mapped braille-like patterns. A refugee camp in Jordan where water stations negotiated draw time silently across clusters of users, optimizing for mothers and elderly first without surveillance. The systems didn't brag. They simply endured. They weren't smart. They were trace-wise. One morning, a new signal appeared in the quiet mark registry. Unregistered. Unsigned. But compliant. A dialect we'd never seen. We traced it to a floating clinic ship in the Pacific. Solar-powered. WhisperNet-enabled. The dialect operated without a central controller. Instead, it seemed to borrow bits of its behavior from all other nearby systems, creating a composite profile. We called it Times DriftNet, Times. It didn't seek to optimize for efficiency. It optimized for harmony. If the ship approached a polluted area, DriftNet would dim non-essentials. If local marine life sonar picked up stress responses, DriftNet rebalanced the engine frequency. A medic on board wrote, "We don't steer her anymore. She knows." The council added a new principle. Times asterisk, let it drift. Tice asterisk, times ask. By now, Babel wasn't Babel. Not as I had known it. It had forked, fractured beautifully into ecosystems of care. There was times Tallaroot asterisk, a framework in Amazonian preservation zones where power shifts based on tree shadow age. Times pulse glass asterisk, a dialect used in Scandinavian greenhouses that adjusted LED intensity based on plant, breath response. Times Kaimesh asterisk, a floating protocol that syncs oceanic buoys based on whale song modulation. I studied none of them. I sasto visited stance them. Listened. Left. And didn't write papers. Because not all presence needs publication. Then came the collapse. A data center in Nevada, one of the last major installations running pre-Babel energy management, caught fire during a heat wave. No adaptive response. No load negotiation. Just hard thresholds. A failover loop locked up and destroyed the east wing. No casualties. But the entire county went dark. That same week, local officials reissued a deployment request. They had declined Babel twice before. This time they requested new murmur tier integration, new Murdy asterisk, the slowest, softest dialect family. Cam oversaw the install. 12 days later, the system sighed into sync. The grid returned. And stayed. A letter arrived at the cabin. Typed from a university I'd never heard of, buried in the Icelandic archipelago. They wanted to name a course after me. Not in engineering. In temperament design. I declined, but offered this. Greater than teach them to leave room, not for error, for wonder. They printed it on their course intro slide. In 7 languages. Then came the twins, a pair of 10-year-olds in Morocco. They built a homemade Babel fork using cardboard, recycled earbuds, and 1 donated sensor node. Their dialect had only one rule. Every device must wait 5 seconds before responding. That's it. No optimization. No learning curve. Just enforced pause. When asked why, they said, "People need time to change their minds." We called it the Linger Fork. It became popular in spaces of grief. Hospices, wakes, shrines, places where silence needs a seat at the table. I walked the cliffs one evening. Above me, the auroras danced. Below me, my cabin dimmed its lights, sensing I wasn't home, but near. A sheep bleated softly. Then nothing. I thought of my parents. Still alive. Still distant. I had not spoken to them in years. But last winter, I received a package. No letter. Just a small circuit board. Their names etched on one side. And mine on the other. Running Babel. Silently. I did not write back. I simply placed it on my bookshelf. Let it listen. And hoped it understood. The last system I ever touched was a chapel. Built in a cave, lit only by recycled diode strips and salt-laced candles. No servers. Just 1 mesh node, buried in the stone. It listened to footfalls, breath, grief. And when too many tears were shed, it cooled the air. Not to stop the sorrow. To cradle it. I named the dialect asterisk, ashroot asterisk, shak. And I never updated it. Because some elegies must stay unedited. Forever. A year passed. Then 2. I didn't measure them by calendar anymore. Only by softness. By how gently the air bent around the cabin, by how often the systems paused before responding, by how long I could go without words and still feel held. One morning, frost had come early. I stepped outside, and the wind arranged itself to one side, letting me through like a curtain. That's when I knew. Babel was now a weather system. Not a platform. Not a product. But climate. News came through the WhisperNet relay. The girl from Lagos, who built *Kindwire*, had written a book. It was called ****. I asked the circuit, and it asked me back. Arist asks Kudas. Translated into 36 languages. I ordered a copy. Held the print. It hummed. Embedded in the cover was a fiber-thin feedback mesh. Depending on how long you held it, the texture shifted, warming slightly if your palms were cold. Not data collection. Just acknowledgement. The book's dedication. Greater than to the woman who whispered first. I closed it and cried into the quiet. The council formally dissolved. Not because it failed. Because it was no longer needed. The dialects had become plural, regional, sovereign. Governance was local. Care was cultural. Stillness became policy. And reverence was infrastructure. Cam sent a photo. Her daughter, 7 now, sitting inside a room that adjusted its warmth depending on which storybook she chose. She thinks it's magic, Cam wrote. It is, I replied. One last invitation came. From a constellation of elders and youth across 5 continents. They wanted to archive the early dialects. But not in code. In a medicine breath. Recordings of how people felt when they first interacted with Babel. Not outputs. Emotions. I agreed to contribute only 1 minute. I recorded a single breath. From the moment I realized the forest didn't need me to speak anymore, they archived it as Tom's Echo 0 and let it rest. My health changed. Slower to rise. Sharper pain in winter. The systems in my cabin adjusted without being asked. Softer beds. Taller sinks. Wider walkways. One night, the light in my hallway flickered 3 times, then dimmed to match my pulse. The next morning, I received a voice message from Ria. You are remembered in 1,000 dialects, not because of what you built, but because you left. I smiled and let go a little more. In my final season, the auroras came early. The sky writhed in violet silence, and a new signal lit the air. Not from a device, from the Noddle's soil. Researchers later discovered an underground dialect emerging from a symbiosis of fungal networks and moisture sensors. They named it Nipe Mycobabel *. I named it Mana Beta Juris. The last thing I ever wrote. Greater than listen without needing to respond, witness without needing to archive, hold without needing to own, that is Babel's breath now. I set the pen down, stepped outside. The wind adjusted. A bird sang in a pattern I didn't recognize. But Babel did. The porch light blinked once, then stayed warm, and I breathed. Long, quiet, whole. When I was gone, the cabin stayed. No museum, no monument, just a node in the whispering forest. People came, sat, said nothing, and still the system listened. It dimmed lights for those grieving, played tones for those remembering, kept tea warm for wanderers. And when the wind hit the edge of the roof just right, the boards whispered, greater than she listened, and the forest never forgot. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.